So I had the day off and I need to do a little repair on this four-wheeler rack. So it's cold out here, but this is the day that I had to work on it, so I'm gonna try to make the best of it. All right, so it has this little thin wall round tubing going down here to the frame, and it is broken. So I'm going to try to add some 1-inch angle iron to it because I already have the angle iron. I'm going to have to do some welding, and if I can find my tape measure, not to weld with, but to measure with. But I'm going to have to do some welding here in a little bit. And was thinking about, and I'm not a welder, and I know I have some people that'll be watching this video, some guys that'll be watching it that are welders and are fabricators, so don't come after me, please. I can do it, I'm just not great at it, and that's okay. It holds most of the time. So, but one of the key things with welding, if you've ever welded, and you'll know this, is there's a balance between the heat, the amount of, if you're using a wire welder, the speed the wire's coming out, and the speed, your travel speed of your gun. So it has to be a balance. If you go too fast, you're gonna outrun your puddle. If you don't have enough heat, you're not gonna have penetration. Anyway, so there's this balance that has to be had for a good, strong weld. If you go too slow, if you have too much heat, you're gonna blow a hole. I've done all those things. I'll probably do it, again. I might do it today. So let's get into this. I'll do a little time lapse, and then we'll get into how this relates to our life. America. Blow a hole. I might have burned a small hole. That rack metal's thin. So I was able to finish the four-wheeler rack brackets, get them cut and welded and bolted back on the four-wheeler, but it has gotten dark, cold, and actually it's sleeting outside now. So moved inside here to the shop, and I want to wrap this up and tell you what I believe welding has to do with the Bible and how kind of bring this all together, and maybe this makes sense to you like it did in my head. So the idea of welding, as I'm sure many of you know, is to take two pieces of metal and to mix them together. And most of the time you have some kind of filler like a rod or a wire, but it's this idea of merging those two pieces of metal together. And there's a lot that goes into doing that correctly and doing it right and making it strong. And so, but that mixing or those merging of two things together is really what I want to focus on here, because it reminded me of probably my favorite passage in the New Testament. For several years, I've really, this has been a passage that I've studied and that I've focused on because it encapsulates so much of who Christ is and so much of how we should model our life and what the gospel is really about. So the passage that I'm referring to is in the Gospel of John. It's in John chapter 1, and It's John 1:14, and I'll read it to you, and then we'll kind of go over it, kind of break it down a little bit. So John 1:14 says, the Word, capital W, the Word, talking about Jesus, the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. In other words, Jesus, who was God, came to earth as a person and dwelt among people, or made his dwelling, or lived among people. The verse continues, he says, we have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father. And then this is the portion of the passage that I really want us to focus on here. And it says, he came from the Father, full of grace and truth. See, Jesus did something that I don't believe anyone in history was able to do before, and that was to merge these two things that seemed opposite together into one, and that is grace and truth. Because the truth of the gospel says this. It says that I am broken, that I have sinned and I have fallen short of the glory of the God. And that's a little offensive when you tell someone, hey, there's something wrong with you. But if we're completely honest with ourselves, we know that something's wrong, right? Like, we know that we're not perfect. We know that if there's the standard is perfection, and if we're completely honest, we all would say, man, I am not perfect. So the truth of the gospel says that no one is perfect, then we all sin, and we fall short of that standard God has. And that's the truth. When it says Jesus is full of grace and truth, he went around telling people, hey, you need God. Like everyone's broken, and everyone needs to come to Jesus. And then the grace of the gospel says this. It says that, yeah, you might be broken, or you are in fact broken, but Jesus came to do something about your brokenness. Something that you could not do for yourself. And that is be this perfect sacrifice that makes you, once you accept that perfect sacrifice, it makes you perfect in the sight of God. It doesn't make you perfect, as in you never do anything wrong again or never sin again. But the merger of these two, the merger of grace and the merger of truth into one, is just a really cool thing, in my opinion. Because often what we do, and you probably fall into one of these camps, we are either heavy on truth and light on grace, or we're heavy on grace and light on truth. Because an emphasis on truth without grace, it's kind of can be harsh or come across as rude, and people will just say, well, I'm just telling the truth. But if there's no grace in that mixed in with that, it can just seem harsh or rude. And if you have just all grace and no truth, that's very shallow. There's no standard, there's no justice in that. So we can't do it perfectly the way Jesus did, but if we can live a life that is full of grace and full of truth, and we can try to find that balance, and we can try to mix those two together, we'll look a lot more like Jesus than going to one extreme or another. So I hope that makes sense. The way it did in my head, because when I was thinking about, hey, I'm going to go out here and I'm going to weld this, and I'm going to mix these two metals together. I don't know, that verse is always just kind of in my mind because it's one of my favorite verses. And when you're talking about mixing those two things that seem opposite, as in grace and truth, together. So I hope that encourages you guys today.